MP and member for Higgins Michelle Ananda-Rajah and Liberal MP and member for Bass in Tasmania Bridget Archer both were present during question time when the Treasurer spoke there on the Reserve Bank Board's decision, but due to a number of divisions in the House that were expected about now, they had the wisdom to join us just a little earlier. So we had a chat so we wouldn't be interrupted if we tried to do it live. Here's how that went. Well, Michelle and Bridget, welcome back, both of you, for the new year. There's a bit happening here in Parliament House. So, Michelle, to you, looking at question time, first of all, it's very obvious from the Coalition's questions that cost of living will be front and centre for them. This is starting to get uncomfortable now, isn't it, with the latest RBA decision and the fact that this year we're going to have 800,000 households going up that interest rate cliff, as they call it.
Yeah, so the RBA's announcement today was not entirely unexpected. We know that inflation is at a 30-year high, 7.8%, but we do believe that it is going to moderate over the next 12 to 18 months. And as a result, they had to act. And unfortunately, as you know, it's a blunt instrument, increasing interest rates, and it does inflict pain on millions of Australians, particularly the 3.6 million who have mortgages. I want to say this, though, that inflation is a complex beast, and it's made up of supply-side problems as well as energy, and also to a lesser extent, I guess, natural disasters. And all of these things, we have a suite of measures, both that are acting in the short term as well as medium to long term. In the short term, things like cheaper medicines have come online, cheaper childcare, a huge cost of living burden and imposition on families is going to be relegated to the past in July of this year. And we brought in fairly significant energy reform after 9 years of policy chaos on this front. We had to intervene with a fairly extraordinary intervention, capping coal and gas prices in December of last year. But longer term, we also have an energy policy, finally, that has
given, not all of those measures have
certainty.
Yet made any real effect on, or no, it's a heavy dent anyway on inflation.
But they will. And I want to also say that, with this, you have to play the long game. We've emerged from a 1 in 100-year crisis of obviously the pandemic, and we also have that additional pressure of climate change upon us. So we have to also look to start making things in Australia, and this is why we're focused on a National Reconstruction Fund, $15 billion investment, which is going to actually make that future made in Australia a reality. And it's really, really disappointing that the Liberals and the Nationals have decided to vote against this. In fact, completely perplexing.
Well, you may yet be able to pass it without them on the numbers. Bridget, I get the point of asking the questions on cost of living in the Parliament today, but were the tables turned and the Coalition was still in power, you're in exactly the same situation, aren't you? The levers that government can pull in this current situation are extremely limited on inflation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they are. It is difficult to find levers to pull that don't drive inflation further. So I think it's important to recognise that. And the point that Michelle's made about these longer-term plans is important, and I think it is important. But we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't ask those questions either. And as you said, if the situation was reversed, the Labor Party would be asking the questions as well, because that's what our communities are saying to us. We know that our communities are really doing it tough, that people and families in our communities are really starting to feel the pinch. And whilst these, these measures are well-intentioned, the fact is that, medicines have become cheaper, but other things have been going up at the same time. The childcare costs don't come down until after the 1st of July, and that's assuming you can get a place, which is another sort of side of the equation as well, which goes to that supply issue that Michelle was talking about. And
Michelle did single out a position that your party has adopted in the last 24 hours on this reconstruction fund, $15 billion to get manufacturing going against this in this country again. Does that sit comfortably with you, that decision?
Yeah, look, I think I need to spend some more time looking at what that means. I think certainly we want to see manufacturing get going in the country. I think that would be an aim that is broadly shared. But what does that look like? What does the mechanism look like for achieving that, and is the best way to do it, I think, is the conversation that we are having. And again, you would expect us to do that. But, you know, I think we want to see more things made here. We know that some of those supply challenges that we've seen are directly related to things that we don't make here and that we have to get from elsewhere. So, you know, as always, I'm open to kind of constructive conversations. But the government is the government now, and they can't continue to just say, oh, well, this was a problem that we've inherited, because they do. And I think Australians rightly expect them to govern.
Well, we'll explore that a little further in the program with others. Michelle, can I take you to something else that's before the Parliament today? In fact, the very first thing in the House, and this is the lapsing of the legislation that designates Nauru as an offshore processing place or regional processing place. How did that come about?
So my understanding of this situation is that this was an internal departmental oversight. Now, what came to the minister's attention in December after Parliament had risen, and as soon as the minister became aware of it, she has acted. And this is why this is now being tabled as a matter of urgency in the first week of the new Parliament, of the new year. So, you know, it hasn't compromised our border control. I want to make that clear. Nauru remains an offshore processing centre, and this may come as a surprise to many people, given my cultural background. I am Sri Lankan and Tamil, as you know, but I do support this policy. I do support Operation Sovereign Borders, mainly because it has worked. It has kept the boats away from Australia, and it has saved lives. I certainly do not want to see people risk their lives coming to Australia, and I do not want to expose our border force men and women to further risk.
Yeah, well, this will all be shored up on the numbers. That much is evident, Bridget, because your side will help out with the legislative fix. But does the government's explanation put here by Michelle wash with you, departmental mix-up?
Look, I don't know what the situation is that's led to this occurring, and I think it is important to understand how that's happened, because it's really a far from ideal situation. And, you know, if the government became aware of that in December, Parliament was recalled. Admittedly, we may have risen again, but Parliament could have been recalled to deal with that, given the urgency of it. But I think it's important to understand how this has occurred, and there has obviously been a failure somewhere along the line. So I think that needs to be identified, and measures put in place, obviously, to try and stop that from occurring.
Yeah, rather perplexing when you consider the centrality of that as a underpinning of our border security system. Why don't we go to The Voice, because we've got a bit on this afternoon. You'll probably have to be elsewhere before too long. South Australia is now jumping on board. Your home state, Victoria, is well down the path. A poll out today, Essential poll, Michelle, still has support for The Voice at about 63%. Where do you think the momentum sits on this at the start of the year?
It is growing. So we have had a summer of negativity when it comes to The Voice. Now, I think the negative Nellies have had their day, they've had their run, and the people of goodwill are going to come over the top of this like a tsunami, and it is building. That momentum is building, you can feel it. Now, I come from a constituency in Higgins, which is solidly pro-voice. The people understand what this is. They understand that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to unify our nation, to reconcile finally our past with our present in order to go forwards into the future. And this is really also about doing two things. One, firstly, getting rid of this fiction of terra nullius, right? That has persisted in the birth certificate of our nation, and it needs to change. And the second is really a proposal which is radical in its modesty. It's simply saying that we as parliamentarians need to get better advice, and we need to listen to some inconvenient truths posed to us by our First Nations people so that we can make better informed laws with them rather than for them. So
You make it sound simple.
that's what it is. It is actually, this is what I mean. It is radical in its modesty and its simplicity. It is, the sky is not going to fall in, I promise you. And in fact, we desperately need this. And as a parliamentarian, I welcome it.
Well, I know you're going to agree with that, Bridget Archer, because next week, or as early as next week, you're going to co-chair a parliamentary friendship group. I assume you can sign Michelle up now. But
We already have, yes.
we know where you stand. What are your reflections, though, on where the momentum sits? Because there has been a lot of criticism, a lot of questions over the summer period. Do you think that dissipates in the weeks and months ahead?
Look, I don't think it's unreasonable for people to ask questions. I think that's absolutely fine. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a decision for Australians to make. You know, politicians will do a lot of talking, as we do, but ultimately this is a decision that Australians will make. And it is, I think, a fairly simple proposition. Do Australians want to recognise Indigenous people in the Constitution? I think it's not a difficult question, and I think it really goes to fairness, and I think it is reasonable to ask questions. And people might say, well, I don't know much about it, or I want to see some detail, and there is a lot of detail there. And the government and others, I think, and people of goodwill will come together and find a way to distill that detail that people want as the conversation goes on. But I think we need to take a bit of a breath on it and just...
So your position, just finally, is very clear, as you've explained it here, Bridget. Does that mean that whatever position your party adopts, you can be counted in the yes column right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that, as always, with my decision-making, I endeavour to reflect the views of my constituency, and certainly from the conversations that I have, I think that there is support for recognising First Nations people in the Constitution.
Well, you certainly got a reputation for doing and saying such things, including on this program, Bridget Archer. You did that last year, and it sounds like you're prepared to do it again on The Voice. Michelle Ananda-Rajah, Bridget Archer, thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure you've got places to be very quickly, so we'll do